Briefly, I'd like to introduce this panel, the Internet of Everything, Connectivity and Security in Smart Regions. Connectivity is the foundational layer of smart planning. Connectivity can solve many problems, but as we all know, it creates many new vulnerabilities. And I think some of our esteemed panelists will talk about, but I think one of the things that's really important to emphasize here is that many private companies face up to 1 billion cyber attacks per day. And if you think about that in the context of cities who need that infrastructure, the expertise, resiliency to be able to thwart that, and then private companies, how they're dealing with it. And then from a more futuristic perspective, if we're going to have all this connectivity, autonomous vehicles, and all these other items we've been speaking about, one of the key pillars, it has to be secure for cities and all stakeholders to have confidence in that. So I will quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right into it. First, we have TJ Costello. We have Tom Synan, Bob Bennett, Chris Rezendes, who just joined us, and he's from IoT Impact Labs in Boston. I'm sorry? Context Labs now. Yeah. Congratulations, and sorry we don't have a mic for you. Great. Yeah. And then finally, as everyone heard from André Hentz, and thank you everyone for being here today. So I'd first like to start with André, if you don't mind. How and why is DHS investing in the Internet of Things?
So in the talks earlier, we heard of different vignettes about what the Internet of Things means. And the reason that I invest in it is not only because my leadership tells me to, but there's also other ancillary reasons. Like the president announced, his smart cities framework, right? And so what's expected of me is that as things come online, we will have done the core underpinnings of research to ensure things like, as this thing talks to that other thing, if our law enforcement activity is going to use it, how do we ensure that those communications are safe and secure? How do we ensure that they protect privacy? And so my research portfolio must naturally take into account what are our existing laws, our privacy laws, our civil rights and civil liberties laws, and then how can we come up with good political and technological strategy that ensures the protection of that and also to motivate and promote commerce. So that's one immediate reason. But more tactically, we heard, I think I was talking to CJ, and he's talking about flooding. And what's interesting is that we partner with the Lower Colorado River Authority in one of those public-private partnerships. FEMA spends an incredible amount of money on paying out insurance claims. That's one of the main things that they pay out, and that's from flood. So what we've done is we've motivated a commercial base where we're using IoT sensors, we're putting them in the river, and they're doing exactly what TJ was talking about. They're tipping and queuing downstream such that decision makers can make a decision as to, do I tell you to hunker in place, or do you get in the school buses and evacuate? Because that's going to have an impact one way or another, right? There's always these cost drivers. So our leadership expects us to do those kind of things, and there are practical reasons, public-private partnership, and pure safety. And so we hope to get a return on investment and drive down risk to the community. So that's how we do it.
Oh, thanks, André. And I think that's a great point. It takes investment, it takes collaboration. And with that in mind, I would like to bring it to TJ, who you mentioned. TJ, if you wouldn't mind talking a little about your efforts at Cisco, some of the opportunities and projects you're working on. What are some of the challenges that you foresee in the smart city space as well?
We've got customers that have come to us and said, hey, I mentioned earlier climate change. For those of you that don't know, Moody's in November signaled that they might change the bond rating for cities if you're not prepared for urban resiliency. So think about preparedness. It puts a whole new light on what a city has to do or sensors out to put an entire new storm drain system out because they need to prepare better as the water levels rise along the coastal community. When you start to think about that, if they did their deployment based on historical data, they might build it one way. If they could combine it with real-time data, the accuracy of that investment, which is a several billion-dollar investment, goes up, and they might be able to justify their compliance with what could be the bond rating change. And that's how we see customers beginning to use smart cities, starting to think about the impact. While they're doing that for planning purposes, they also want to take advantage to alert citizens for the flooding that happens in the interim. I think it's a terrific example of how cities are beginning to think about data, IoT, and smart city services and investment. Can I add one comment to that?
Please, Chris.
You don't need the mic. I think I'm so happy you brought up risk, and I'm so happy you brought up financial risk. We argue at Context Labs and at Impact Labs that as we think about the killer app for IoT, that we start with risk. And our ability to better define or redefine, identify, assign, reassign, price, reprice, mitigate, or eliminate risk is far more compelling than transformation. These big conceptual ideas where
Can you use the microphone, please? The camera cannot hear you.
as powerful as Musk has been to fire our imagination, most middle market managers, whether they're in municipalities or factories, can't even start thinking about transformation unless they can start to manage risk. They need stability operationally, financially, and I would argue increasingly from a cyber risk and a climate risk perspective. So what I'm going to add is this. Whatever risk models the public or private sector is using now to evaluate investments in digital or physical or cyber physical, add cyber risk and add climate risk. Two reasons. One, I'm on the board of a bank, FDIC regulated, maybe $2.5 billion in total assets. And as a class of financial institution, we might do more green project lending than almost any one of our peers nationally that isn't specifically a green bank. So one of the latest proposals we looked at was for almost $30 million for renewable wind energy. And we went through the traditional American Bankers Association risk evaluation, and then we added our proprietary evaluation. And what was not to my satisfaction was the cyber risk analysis. Because if you look at the money that's going into, say, renewable wind energy, the utilization rate of those turbines is getting pretty damn close to 97 or 98% in order to return on invested capital. One knucklehead with one DDoS attack can destroy ROI on one turbine. And since most of the capital for these projects is coming from the private sector in the form of bonds, whose interest is primarily in no or low beta, i.e. no risk, we will not see capital flow into smart cities projects if we don't address cyber risk, because the bond investors will have a massive uncovered liability. Part one. Part two is, it isn't just the cities whose bond ratings may suffer, but it's TJ's company, Siemens, Schneider, IBM, and all of the utilities companies who have on their own balance sheets and through their lines of credit, their own capital that they've invested to capitalize these smart cities projects, because the cities don't have the cash. So when we think about Moody's potentially re-rating municipal bonds, it's not just muni bonds, it's green bonds, impact bonds, and corporate bonds that have gone to front-end these smart cities projects. So when we think about climate risk, I would beg us to also pair with it cyber-physical security risk, because the money will not come to capitalize these projects if those two risk vectors remain exposed. I appreciate you letting me jump in.
Absolutely. And I'd love to bring, Bob, you in on this subject matter as well. You have tons of experience at this level, probably dealing with some of these issues we've been talking about. Can you share your experience in this?
Sure. Our first phase project included 14 partners. The two largest partners were big companies, Sprint and Cisco. But also we had other smaller companies, little startup firms like Sensity, which later got acquired by Verizon, and Exact, which is a data analysis firm. which actually combined their efforts. And it was that combined effort that allowed us to actually make the financial requirements to complete a $20 million project with only $3.8 million in terms of city efforts. And one of the things I'm excited about as we look forward to expanding to our second phase is the fact that through the leadership of DHS, we are actually looking at a multi-city assessment of cybersecurity integrated into every single supercluster that the Department of Commerce's NIST has formed to start looking at what comes next. And I'm very happy that as one of the co-chairs for the city platform supercluster, I've got a DHS guy who's in the room with us, who's helping us to address that cybersecurity issue. And also we're able to bring in Alex Huppenthal, who brings in a private sector team that allows us to start bringing in technology partners. Because I will tell you, the city tools I have to mitigate that risk, they're not as good as what Cisco has. And that's why we partner. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see more and more opportunities for us to combine forces in order to mitigate that risk.
No, absolutely. And I think one topic that really would like to get into in this panel as we go forward here is about collaboration. And one of the things that the federal government has done well is figured out how do they collaborate with private sector companies to share cybersecurity threats and information. And that's a challenge, and I think it's also a model of how you can collaborate in other regions. But before we get to that, I would like to introduce your chief here and talk about from what you see in your community, this conversation. How do we think about security and connectivity with the human element? How does this affect people? What are some of the things that all of the folks here who are collaborating, what are some of the things that might be able to help your efforts?
Well, first of all, if you ever want to feel like a cop, wear a uniform, and second, sit on a panel like this with so much technology. Like, I am a cop. I'm like, oh, man, I'm trying to figure out my smartphone, and you're all connected. Well, what was important was the collaborations, and we knew from law enforcement that we were not the ones that would be able to necessarily push this to the next level. Matter of fact, when we reached out with the collaborations, I said, I don't have the resources, I have the connections. I am part of the government, not the federal government. I'm even smaller. So we definitely didn't have the resources. So what was important to us was, number one, not just collaborate with the other entities and government systems, but businesses and technology, and encourage people. And we actually put out the challenge for technology, and we wanted people to come in and be innovative and ask them, can you help us with the opiate epidemic? And not just the opiate epidemic, but hopefully it builds a foundation to change, like I said, how we view and deal with all addiction. So here's my thing with technology, and I just got to be frank with this. Technology is not going to solve addiction. What I hope technology does is allows us to be a better link, and there's been no other issue in my 25 years of law enforcement that has really shown to me, like the opiate epidemic, how much of a link we really are in law enforcement. The opiate epidemic is not just overdoses and drugs. It is social issues, it is economic issues, it is family issues, it's education. It's all those things that we run into with the addiction part of it. So we look at ourselves as the link to that, needing that technology to make our jobs more effective and more efficient and connect systems all the way around, whether it is government systems or private systems, and especially hospitals and treatment centers. So that's where we're looking at technology, and that's how we're looking at hopefully, how it can help connect us with addiction and the services we need.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really fantastic approach and model that you're taking. And given that, one of the things that we should all be thinking about is whether you're in private sector or public, how is your business or organization adapt to this new emerging economy? And with that, I'd love to ask André and then TJ to jump in here. And the last word of the question is a little bit different, but given the emerging threats and rapid innovation cycles, how is André S&T changing the way it does business? And TJ, for Cisco, the same question.
Wow. So let me try to use...
Thanks for going first.
That's, yeah. So to keep the conversation relative to what we've talked about, TJ earlier mentioned smart cities and drones and delivery of commerce and goods. And recently, our counterpart, federal partner at the FAA, announced here in DC the ability to open up how folks can use drones, right? Now, what's expected of me? I'm DHS. So I'm expected to ensure that there's security associated with drone use, and there's a restriction area and so on and so forth. So what we've been trying to do is change how we think about what does it mean to do R&D in that workspace. But in order to do that, I must know some very important information. How might the commercial world use these drones to deliver a burrito or a beer or whatever it is at a premium cost? And so the moment that I begin to try to prescribe a mitigation, it starts to break down if I don't understand how you, the cities, and the states are going to use this emerging technology. The other part is the technology emerges at such a rapid pace to where I have to be so far out on the front end to where we're almost retro engineering how we think about what it means to be futuristic, right? Not to plug DJI or anything like that, but a DJI Phantom is autonomous, right? There is no human in the loop. You can plug it into your computer, code it up by wavepoints, turn it on, and tell it to go do something. Now, that's great if you are a benevolent user, right? It's pretty scary if I'm a bad guy, right? So I have to think about what are those potentials and then try to develop research and engineering initiatives that will address that. And I'm not smart enough. I can't go it alone. So I have to work with people like NASA, the FAA, Department of Defense, state, local, industry, academia, and all of the above. So we do things like cooperative research and development agreements where, you know, we entice the industry to come and share information with us, and we protect it, because oftentimes your secret sauce is very valuable from a financial standpoint. And so we just try to model ourselves that way and be very forward-leaning. We try to take lessons learned from the Valley and try to adopt as much as we can and apply it to the old convoluted government world. So sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not, but I'm certainly trying really hard.
That's the
TJ?
Silicon Valley way, I think, as well.
So I'll think of a public safety example. A customer has an issue where maybe today they have a video camera to assess the landscape, and that is effective or ineffective depending on the time of day. So then they want to look at a new type of technology to be able to assess at night. They might try an emerging technology like LiDAR. So it's light radar that you'll see commonly deployed in autonomous vehicles. Or in the event of a disaster, they may want to leverage drones to be able to assess the landscape so as not to put their officer in harm's way or their public safety professional in harm's way, but at the same time still service the citizen. If you think about those scenarios, to the operator, those are to Cisco, those are just different data sources. So we took an architectural approach to be able to pull the data regardless of the system, regardless of the technology, and to be able to operationalize that so that as the devices change, because they're changing at just an incredibly rapid pace, and we want to be able to take advantage of it, we're taking our heritage of connecting disparate and systems that have never connected together, both in a data fabric and a network, a secure network. So that would be a good example.
Can I offer two quick instances or examples of collaboration?
Please.
One at the federal level. Short story first is that DHS was running a session on first responders and Internet of Things and such in Boston. Was it 2 years ago, 17, 16? And what was really different and refreshing was you guys came in and you said, we don't want to do the talking. We want to do the listening and the learning. So they asked us to help recruit, I don't know, 10, 12, 15, Dan, you guys were there. We had 10, 12, 15 fire chiefs, captains, lieutenants, shift supervisors. We had basically folks from fire, police, and EMT. And we had these stand-up sessions where we basically got to teach the technologists what it really means to be frontline fire, police, EMT. What's a day in the life of fire, police, EMT like? What are their challenges? And here was the real key for us. How are they innovating? See, one of the things that happens too often is whenever there's a big, hairy, audacious goal or a big problem that seems too complex for any city, town, or middle market enterprise to address. Everyone says, go to the Valley, go to the Valley, go to the Valley. Valley's brilliant at social, mobile, freemium, scaling, single unit, monolithic, high volume stuff. But no offense, I don't think the Valley's that good at the fragmented, messy, OpEx intensive real world. So they come to Boston. I had to plug.
Plug away.
Hey,
But the example I want to give you is, I know oftentimes you're hearing from folks from one of the agencies. I can tell you firsthand, you invite them in, you collaborate on an agenda that is to listen from the frontline or first line operational, experienced, expert people, and magic happens. And what we got out of that was, first line wanted 3 things. I'd really like to get the latest, I'll give you the solution, event-based, public, first responder access to private building information management systems. So you're a real estate developer, you own 300,000 square feet of Class A space, you've spent maybe $500,000 on house systems, and you don't really want that to go anywhere because it represents a risk vector. It's for HVAC, it's for security and access control, it's for lighting, it's for energy. But we've got folks now ready to prepare to open up those systems on an event basis so that first responders can get the best information about the latest state and status of the building, so we don't send first responders into basements that have 1 million gallons of water and air-gapped or white-spaced backup or auxiliary power systems. We lose first responders when they run into burning buildings and they don't have the latest and greatest on the schematics. And it was, I'm going to say the collaboration was DHS saying, we don't want to speak, we don't want to talk, we want to listen. First one. Second one, we're right now in a task order on a multi-million-dollar project for a couple of agencies who specifically said, we need innovators with IP in network security, in instantiating identity in the network. We need folks who have a true scalable blockchain implementation, that's us. And we need folks who understand how to get the embedded data, machine data, not just TCP/IP data. That's happening right now. That was a federal agency saying, yeah, we're going to use the big LSIs and we're going to use the big IT vendors, but we must have smaller and middle market innovators. And the last one to speak to the chief, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, we have one of the first innovation funds that's run by a United Way. The United Way of Greater New Bedford has an innovation fund, and they put out a call for proposals for social service or public service agencies to find solutions that include social sciences and services and technology. And one that they chose was a holistic approach to try and remediate some of the opioid addiction that exists in southeastern Mass. Part of the solution is a new approach to teaming in the social services and healthcare professions, but then on the digital side, there's a company called BioBot out of MIT, run by a woman named Nusha Gailey, who is Persian by way of Toronto at MIT. Think about that for a minute. She's Persian by way of Toronto out of MIT, and what she's come up with is an ability to put a box in a catchment basin in the sewer system so you can start to triangulate and specify where the opiate daughter products or the opiate parent products are coming from. So it's not just the stuff that's been ingested and processed, but the stuff that's been dumped down a toilet to such a high degree that we can actually get to the prescription itself in some cases. So to the chief's point, the technology is a tool, it's not an answer. And to your point about collaboration, Mitch, it's right on. We're living this very local collaboration, this regional collaboration, and even this federal collaboration. Got to have some technical people. There's got to be a real ROI. Somebody's got to pay the bill. But I think if people get together, work hard enough, it happens.
Absolutely. Chief, did you either one of you want to comment?
No, that was really cool.
Yeah. No, that does sound pretty amazing. And Chris and everyone else hit on a point that I think is very crucial to underline is that, you look internationally and there has been some success, and success is a relative term, about building smart cities and this digital transformation. And in the US, we face different obstacles. New York has its existing infrastructure, same with DC, and certainly there are areas in the country that you could create new communities, and that's a great idea, but how do you take all these disparate parts, the finance, the real estate, the government agencies from all levels, and create a symbiotic relationship? And with that, I'd love to open it up to our audience here, if anyone had any questions for our panel.
I'd submit to you there's really only three ways that you could do a truly smart city in order to make sure that it's inclusive, in order to make sure it's future-oriented, in order to make sure that it's being able to address your data concerns. And that's either transportation systems, water systems, or electronic systems. So to the extent that we can engage those communities from an infrastructure perspective to give us the tools we need for whatever problem it is we're facing. I would also submit to you that this is not an infrastructure problem. I can make any city in the United States today a relatively smart city without any infrastructure changes whatsoever. Because 85% of the data you need to better understand your community already exists. I know where things are growing because I've got the permit data. I know where people are moving and how many people are doing things because I've got the water use data. I can correlate that with my electronic use data. If I want to see where crime truly is a problem, I can break it down to types of crime, and then I can correlate that with other sets of data, which aren't even necessarily city data. If I want to understand how people are taking advantage of opportunities, I go to the FCC, drag out their A377 data, and I know how fast the internet is moving in different locations. I know today that 97% of my citizens in Kansas City have access at their front door or in the front of their housing addition a fiber connection with at least a gig connectivity. What I don't have in my digital inclusion strategy that's being executed and changed on now is the training programs, the how do you write a resume in the 21st century, or the Cisco platform, which is awesome, called the Cisco Network Academy, where folks who are currently working at the Ford plant in Clay Como or the GM plant over in Fairfax, Virginia, when those jobs go away, now I'll go over to the Network Academy and learn how to swap out blades in a server. And now all of a sudden, people who live in these neighborhoods who are doing what the congressman said earlier about traditional blue-collar jobs, yes, you don't need a college degree to swap out blades, but you're going to make a whole lot more money than you would have before. And so instead of gentrifying neighborhoods, those neighborhoods are growing from the ground up. So the requirements drive the strategy drives which infrastructure I go out and get, and then we obviously apply the small business platforms in order to meet those material requirements. But the strategy comes first.
Did anyone else have any comment on that?
What he said, plus one. What he said, plus one. So cyber physical security first, the cyber physical. And for energy, communications, water, wastewater, sanitation, if it's not part of water, wastewater, and then transportation. You've got to get the infrastructure right, and not just from a physical, but from a digital perspective. And I agree with what you said in that I don't think we need trillions of dollars for new concrete, asphalt, steel, and wire and such. What we need is to get these networks secure, especially as they control physical assets, number one. Number two, because you've got to secure the network before you start gaining access to it or enabling others to get access to it, to your point. Who knows, zettabytes of data that exist in all these little hovels, in these little silos. They're dark, they're stranded, they're siloed. And those two things have to come first. You've got to secure your digital assets first, and then you've got to take that new secure stance and start to enable more access to more collaborators so that you can upkit or uplift the cyber physical resilience of energy, comms, water, wastewater, sanitation, and transportation. After that, I'd say the third thing is we have this concept called hybrid service organization, where there's some physical, some digital, and you go after the people who live in or around that proximate location and train them to become this next generation hybrid between a field service organization and a systems integrator. And we know it's possible because we've gone to some of the worst zip codes in the continent. We're in Pine Ridge, we're in Yankton, we're in Rosebud and Porcupine and Standing Rock, and we're in a lot of other places where indigenous people are living far below the poverty line as compared to anyone else in North America. And there is intelligence and intention and industry, and they're creating their own hybrid service organizations from almost nothing. So the fact that you brought up the education and training for quote unquote the local people is perfect, it's brilliant, it's right on. Security, infrastructure, and then the people. And then you do all the stuff that's specific to what the people in that neighborhood want. I'm glad you started that.
I got one.
We have time for one more question, but Chris, you mentioned a great point. It's about people. The technology, in a lot of ways, it already exists. we do have to work with governments and collaborate and try to figure out how we can think about these things and then implement. But if it's not helpful or creating security or sustainability for the people that and the citizens that live in each of your towns, then we're not being successful in that effort. So with that, we have time for one more question. Over there, Michael.
So my question is to the whole panel. We talked a lot about what the technology can do for us as citizens. As part of the policy effort, though, what kind of consideration is given for the longevity or the life cycle? Because what is IoT today in 5 years, 10 years, maybe a rotary phone? And as a citizen and as a public entity, I don't expect us to be, going out and putting in fiber version 2 in 5 years or whatever Cisco has in their dark labs and coming out in 10 years. So I'm curious from a policy perspective, what thought or what results have you given to how do we think about this in 5 years, 10 years, based on a technology that's changing so fast?
When I start to think about a smart region, probably the most important policy thing you can do is have a data policy where you can share appropriately in a federated way amongst the region. Because I'll give you a simple example. Some of these cities are San Antonio talked about how they were going to have more than double vehicle miles traveled. So in the next 20 years. So just imagine they tried to solve that issue and they became more efficient. But suddenly the next community over might have a bottleneck, right? So if they don't have an appropriate way to share policy amongst themselves regionally, and that's a policy driven, that today does, to a large degree, we have not seen at a scale. And then the requirements have to be, it's got to be open, it's got to be interoperable, it's got to be secure, all the normal data policy. That is one where it's not about the technology, it's about setting the table so that as the technology, to your point, evolves, because it inevitably will, you're in a position as a region to have that. And the other policy, I heard, I think it was Chris from Colorado mention it, and I think he chuckled a little bit, it's procurement. Having the ability to move quickly, be able to fail, and learn from that failure, fail fast and move on quickly, and to be able to drive those lessons into the fabric of the region, of the city. Those are two that, no question, have to evolve from what we're seeing.
André?
Yeah, I was just going to add something real quick. I'm sitting here thinking and listening to all this and the big picture of it and the technology, and from the local level, and I'm very, very, very happy to hear everyone talk about people. Because when it comes down to it, all the technology, all the policies, they really do impact the people. And that's what I see. I see, and unfortunately the bad stuff, stand over the bodies of the people, hold the hands of the mothers who have lost children. So I encourage everyone to continue this, connecting the technology and the policies and all the work you're doing, realizing that it does have an impact on the people on the street. And I'm very grateful that you are all talking about that, because that is something very important to me, because I work in a small town. I know everybody there. I've been there for 25 years. They're like family. They've taken care of me as much as I've taken care of them. So it's important that we never forget that it really is about people. And you all have an incredible opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. So I applaud you for that, and I encourage you to continue to think about that it's always about the people on the street.
And I guess to your point, Michael, policy-wise, the thing we emphasize is compatibility. We are today looking at 3 sets of people with whom we communicate in the city of Kansas City. There is a chunk of the population who gets information from us in their water bills, because while we have endeavored to close that digital divide, it's not closed yet. And so the means with which we communicate with them is a water bill that they get every month and they actually pay attention to. The second group are, typical, put it in my mailbox, I'll answer it, no big deal. And then the third group are a good bit younger, and they would prefer to pay online. As we close the digital divide and we get these advanced technologies that TJ's working with us on, that spectrum is going to move, but I have to make sure that I address across that spectrum. And so we focus on the compatibility issues, we focus on the data exchanges, and then obviously for us, the bedrock on all this is our data privacy policy, which preceded the deployment of any sensors in the community. The privacy policy came out in October of 2015. We turned on our first sensor in May of 2016.
You gotta keep that away from me, man.
Well, I think that's really a great place to continue the conversation. And I really want to thank all of our panelists for coming to DC and participating in the Smart Regions Congress. This is really what it's all about, getting everybody in the same room together and figuring out how can we conquer these challenges ahead. So thank you very much, everyone.